Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis. With me, Drew. Now, last time we were talking about both fission monsters and fission and metonymy in Noel Carroll's Biologies of Horror in Philosophy of Horror. I was going to go on to Lovecraft and King's, their versions of monsters and what horror is, what it takes to be horror, but I got distracted over the weekend and I started thinking more about fission. So I'm going to do another fission video, an additional fission video, because I don't know, I was thinking about stuff and stuff came up and I had questions and I figured I'd pose them out to everybody else. Pose them out to Noel Carroll or Noel Carroll supporters, see what they think, because I'm confused on some of the things that I've read in Noel Carroll. I actually went back and read it again, and things are coming up in my brain. The reason things are coming up in my brain is because exactly after I watched this, exactly after I made the video on Friday, I went to IMDb and looked at the new movies coming out, new previews. And I saw a preview for this. The World's End is a new movie that's going to be coming out. It's by the guys who did Shaun of the Dead. Edgar Wright, who wrote Shaun of the Dead. And Simon Pegg was in Shaun of the Dead, so was Nick Frost. They're doing a new movie. They're doing, it's called The World's End. The premise is a bunch of friends, Nick Frost, Simon Pegg, the guy who played Arthur Dent in Hitchhiker's Guide, he's one of the friends, and a few other people, British actors, are doing a pub crawl in their old town. They all live in London now, but they're going back to whatever town they came from to do the big pub crawl. And they find out that all the inhabitants that they grew up with have been turned into robots, with the exception of one of the ex-girlfriends who just came to the town too, and is not a robot, but everybody else in the town is a robot. So they end up having to fight off a robot horde. And I was like, wow, this is very spatial fission-y. Oh, shoot. Hold on. Before I get into that, I had a quick correction from last video. So I'll go to my notes real quick. 1 second. I was confused. I said stuff about... Oh, okay, that didn't help anything at all. I was confused and said about fission monsters, temporal fission. There's two types, of course. Spatial fission, which I'm going to talk about more today, and which I talked about a lot last time. And temporal fission, which was... talked about even more last time. They're the werewolves. They're the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hydes. At different times, the monster is different things. Sometimes he's Larry Talbot. Sometimes he's the Wolfman. Sometimes he's Mr. Hyde. Sometimes he's Dr. Jekyll. At different temporal, it's different times, so it's temporal. What I called it, I said I couldn't think of the right words for it, and it's in here. Page 41. I said the atoms were the same, or atoms were in the same place. The atoms of Dr. Jekyll are the atoms of Mr. Hyde. What I should have said, what Carroll calls it, is much more exact, and I wanted to make point of saying this, is spatially locatable protoplasm. Protoplasm being living matter. Essentially. I'm not going to go into too much definition of what protoplasm is, but life matter, life juice. But it's spatially locatable protoplasm is the same. It's the same. Like I said before, I said it's the same set of atoms for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the Wolfman, or Lawrence Talbot. But spatially locatable protoplasm is way more exact. So I just want to do a quick correction on that. Now back to World's End. So on these guys, it's another horror comedy. The preview looked really good, actually. So I think I'm going to watch the movie as well. So these guys are going on a pub crawl, and their town that they're doing the pub crawl through is taken over by robots, and they somehow have to make it to the last pub to survive. I don't know how that part works, but apparently that's what the preview said. I don't know if the preview said correctly, but or how the last pub would save you. And but the town, all their old friends, all the people that they knew from the town, and the people who moved in afterwards, whatever, the kids that they didn't grow up with, but they have a fight with a bunch of chavs, a bunch of kids anyway. British people will know what chav means. So, and they're, they have to fight these kids in the bathroom, and they beat the crap out of the main characters for a while. I think the main characters end up winning, obviously, but whatever. Now, what I thought in this, it's a comedy, but the Shaun of the Dead guys probably aren't going to pull a whole lot of punches. So, but as it is, it hasn't been released yet. We don't know whether the real people, the people that have been taken over by the robot monsters, are still alive, if they're locked up someplace, or if they're just dead and disposed of. And I thought to myself, well, if there is no other person, is it still a spatial fission monster? Because spatial fission, well, actually, here's the fission definition. In fission, the categorically contradictory elements are distributed over different, though metaphysically related, identities. If should I go into examples he did? No, I won't yet. Anyway, if in the World's End, that's an example I had up already. In the World's End, the real people, are dead and gone and melted into little butter and then washed down the drain. If there's no longer a person there, is it still a spatial fission monster? Do you need the spatial fission monsters? Examples that Carroll didn't... let's go over the examples that Carroll used first. Carroll used... Oh, I'm so going out of order in my notes, which means I'm going to forget stuff. That's fine. Carroll used the picture of Dorian Gray as an example of spatial fission. I had those two up last time. He used Mary Shelley's transformation, which I don't have one for. The Student of Prague, which is an old silent movie about a doppelganger where the student makes a deal with the devil and his reflection comes out of a mirror to, cause havoc, starts committing crimes. It's the Student of Prague. And Warning Shadows, which was about a shadow puppeteer warning men not to hit on the angry duke or count or whatever's wife, but it may not have been the puppeteer at all. After all, mwahahaha. I actually have mwahahaha written down in my notes. Because apparently I didn't see the movie, or I haven't seen the movie yet. there's a puppeteer that you can see the shadow on here. The puppeteer is supposed to be causing these shadows and warning these guys who are hitting on the Duke or Count or whatever's wife not to do it, because violence will befall them in various violent ways. Hot water. Oh, that's better. Oh, and Mary Shelley's Transformation. I actually got to listen to Mary Shelley's Transformation this weekend because it was on LibriVox. And I had it download. I just said, I'm going to go out for a walk and listen to it. It was only about 40 minutes. The reader was good, except there's a lot of background noise, so I don't know if I'd recommend it. I'm sure you can find it on Project Gutenberg as well. I did like the story. It struck me as a malevolent version of Freaky Friday, or... actually, I downloaded, I grabbed some pictures of the Freaky Friday type things. These, I looked up, I had to look up Freaky Friday to see, apparently this was written way back in the 20s or something. The first version of this, well, this is a different movie, but the first version of this was also called Vice Versa, and it was about a man and a boy and his dad switching places. That was 1800s. That's how far back the genre goes. And actually, the one I knew from when I was growing up was Like Father, Like Son in the 80s. Dudley Moore and Kirk Cameron. But Transformation was like that. It was a malevolent dwarf, evil dwarf, switching places with a guy who's down on his luck and is a jackass. In various ways. And you really feel like the dwarf is going to be causing trouble. It turns out that he did the guy a favor, but, whatever. Oh, that was a spoiler. Shoot. Oh, well. Sorry, guys. I recommend it anyway. It's really tense. It's really good. I don't know. I was thinking I'd be more like Frankenstein, and it was sort of slow in the Frankenstein plotting style, Mary Shelley's plotting style. But I was very surprised at how much I enjoyed this, because I was expecting something completely different than how it went. And apparently there was an H.P. Lovecraft. This happened in a couple of H.P. Lovecrafts too. I looked them up, but I don't remember them. But there's a body swap, which is the genre of what Wikipedia calls it, body swap movies or fictions. And apparently there were some Lovecraft ones in there too. Do I have it in my notes? Was I that bright? No. Oh, and the other example that Lovecraft uses, Noel Carroll uses, is I Married a Monster from Outer Space, which I'm going to talk about some more too, because it needs to be talked about. But the examples he didn't use were Invasion of the Body Snatchers and the Stepford Wives. Now, the reason I think he didn't use these is because it'd be more difficult to explain. I mean, he covers fission entirely on 2 pages. He starts at the very bottom of 45, and he goes to essentially the bottom of 47. Oh, maybe he doesn't. I guess he goes to 49. Oh, maybe, hold on a second. 1 second. Yeah, I guess he talks about till 47, 48, and then he talks about some more. But it would take a lot longer to explain how Invasion of the Body Snatchers or Stepford Wives were fission monsters, because essentially there's only the two things only coexist. The two spatial coexist only for a couple of seconds in the book version of Invasion of Body Snatchers. Or, for an hour or so in the Stepford Wives. If you remember this picture just freaks me out. I'm probably going to delete this as soon as I'm just going to delete it now. So, the new Stepford wife comes for the old wife and looks like that. And of course the pod people. There's the scene with a blank on the pool table, and then there's the person who isn't a person yet, who's the pod that's growing into a person. The blank under the girlfriend's house, that's be the girlfriend if it weren't destroyed. And there's the pods that become the skeletons in the closet sort of thing. But as soon as the pods become the person disappears and vanishes into dust. So there's not really, for any amount of time, there's not really two. There's only one. There's the real person up to a point, and then he's replaced, and then there's the other person up to that after that point. Maybe like this much overlap, but not a whole lot of overlap. See, at The World's End, since it hasn't come out yet, I can ask the question, or any other movie that hasn't come out yet, or is about to be made, I can ask the question, since we don't know if there is an overlap at all, if there's no overlap at all, or there is actually two people for a long period of time out through the end of the movie, like if the Stepford Wives, they didn't dispose of the old wives, they just, to bring in the Stepford Wives, they just locked them up someplace in the basement or something. You could formulate a horror movie in which that was the case. Or robots taking over, alien pods taking over, robots taking over again. Or Doppelganger, where the guy is locked up, and only one of them's running around. Or Doppelganger, where the original guy is killed and there's only one of them running around. With no overlap. Excuse me. Now, the question is, if there's no overlap, if it's just replacement, if it's abduction and replacement with the original being gone, being lost, is it still spatial? Is it still a spatial fission monster? Capgras syndrome. Okay, so that's going to be my question of the day. I'm going to talk about a little bit more because I didn't last time, and I think it deserves to be talked about. Pardon me. A little advanced theory on I Married a Monster from Outer Space. The plot. Do I have even any notes on the plot? I don't. It's a replacement alien abduction. The the fiance of the bride-to-be is abducted on his way back from his bachelor party by aliens and replaced by an alien. The real guy is locked up in a meat locker spaceship, as Carroll puts it, on a laser meat hook or something. On a laser meat hook. Oh, this is on his notes section, so it's not exactly the same. A laser meat hook. Ray gun meat hook in an alien spaceship whose interior remembers that of a large icebox. A ray gun meat hook in a large icebox. I said meat locker, so it was a misquoting. And the wife to be, or the now wife, since apparently the alien must have done the marriage, suspects that, something's amiss because he's not showing any affection towards her, he's not showing any affection towards his dogs, pets. And she suspects that it's an imposter. There's some psychological stuff here, but it seemed cool, so I'm going to talk about it briefly. It's not the psychology of horror, but it is psychology that seems cool. This kind of psychology, it's called Capgras delusion. I think Carroll calls it Capgras syndrome. That's Capgras. Capgras. Capgras? Could be Capgras, depending on if he's French or she, whoever it is who discovered it. Capgras delusion. The person believes that their loved one or ones have been replaced by duplicates or imposters. This is also a lot of this is off of Wikipedia, so fair warning. And of course, Wikipedia can't be taken as gospel. Let's see, what do I have to do? So according to Wikipedia, Carroll has a nice little psychological explanation. Wikipedia seemed to lead me to believe that most of Capgras delusions are caused by physical abnormalities, brain lesions, cranial injuries, or Alzheimer's. They did mention it in Freudian terms, Freudian explanation, where either through electra or Oedipal feelings, the opposite gender towards the opposite gender parent, and the disconnect occurs when, to help them deal with those feelings, where the disconnect being believing that they're an imposter. So if you're having Oedipal feelings towards if you're male, you're having it towards your mother. You believe that your mother is an imposter, so you feel more able to deal with Oedipal feelings of sexual attraction. Or towards your male parent, feelings of aggression. Carroll talks about, I guess it's more of a Jungian. He doesn't say what his brand of psychology is. Carroll talks about the disconnect is caused by conflict of feelings, though not necessarily sexual feelings, like Freud. That one can feel hatred and love for the same person at the same time. And if someone has a problem with that, they break the person into two. They think that the person is an imposter, so they feel okay to hate that person, and the person that they've replaced is the victim, so they feel okay to love that person, even though they believe they aren't there right now. So you can have love and hate feelings for the same person, as most people do, but the Capgras delusion breaks. You have a break with reality. It was one of the other sites. And of course the person that's replaced gets the love feelings, and the person that's doing the replacing, the imposter, gets the hatred feelings, according to Carroll. I did look up at a few other sites about this Capgras syndrome, just because it intrigued me. And guess which one they mentioned? Guess what they mentioned? They mentioned Invasion of the Body Snatchers. They even had a picture of, not the movie poster picture, but it's the picture of the one in the center picture of the guy and the girl running from the Body Snatchers, the pod people. Because, one of the soon-to-be victims, because she actually became a victim afterwards, but one of the first people who mentioned it to the doctor, the main character, the guy in the red tie in the picture, I can't remember the character's name. I read it last year, but I forgot. Said, "Oh, my uncle has been replaced by a imposter." He's like, "Oh, what proof do you have of this?" And he goes to meet the uncle, and the uncle seems the same to him. And he said, she said, "I've been waiting for this day. My uncle has a mole right in the back of his neck, and if his hair is long, the mole is covered. But if the hair is short, you can see the mole. And today he got a haircut, so today we'll be able to prove it." So he goes over and says, "Okay, is the mole there?" And she says, "Yes, just like my uncle." So she still believed that the uncle was a fake, and as we know, the uncle actually was a fake. This is also Dance Macabre also talks about that book a lot. The uncle obviously was a fake because he was a pod person, one of the first pod people. And of course, the woman who's accusing him of being an imposter was also taken over by pod people later on. And she calls the doctor and apologizes. "No, my uncle's my uncle. I'm sorry." But that's the first real dealings with the pod people. So Body Snatchers is actually mentioned in one of the first websites that Google popped up with. Now, in the Body Snatchers book, of course, there is the blank on the pool table and the blank person coming from a pod underneath in the basement of the girlfriend's house. So my question, again, I'm going to reiterate, is while the pod is growing, or while there's a time where the pod is a green pod, and then it starts growing into a person-shaped blank, and then it becomes the person, and the person dissolves. Into dust and ash. So the pod, when there's a pod there and there's a person walking around that the pod will soon become, it's not spatial fission because we're talking about a pod, a plant-ish thing. The blank is not really a person because there's no fingerprints at all which I thought was pretty creepy. It's just smooth. The person sort of starts looking like another person, but it doesn't have to be. Not until the very end, where there's only a little bit of correlation. I think it's always when they're asleep. Is that the way it works? They always have to be asleep? Whenever that person falls asleep, then the transfer happens. The pod person becomes the person, the other person disappears into dust. Ash. Is it ash or dust? Whichever. The pod people aren't putting people in a meat locker in outer space, in a spaceship. The Stepford Wives are not, there's a time when the Stepford wife is just being built. I'm going to have to get that picture up, aren't I? A creepy picture. I did delete it. There we go. I have it back now. There's a time when the Stepford wife is comes after the real wife, and has the blank eyes that will be, once they're put in, the real eyes of the wife put in. Stephen King hates that scene, or likes that scene, depending on, it creeps him out, which it should, because that's that's creepy. Oops, wrong button. But Stepford Wives and Body Snatchers, there's not a lot of time where there's two. The corresponding time is very brief. There's the woman is the woman up until a point, and then there's a little space where there's the woman and the copy, and then the woman goes away, and then there's just a copy for the rest of the time. Or the pod people, there's a space at the beginning where the person is the person, then the pod has a tiny sliver of space where the pod is recognizably the person, and the person's still around. And then the person falls asleep, and poof, they're gone. The pod is the only one left, and they go forward into the rest of the movie. World's End, it hasn't been released yet, so we don't know how it goes. They could be in a meat locker in space, I Married a Monster from Outer Space, or they could be gone. The takeover could be instantaneous, or the takeover can be brief, or the takeover can be quite long. The takeover could be Married a Monster from Outer Space. The takeover happened, but the other person was still wandering around, or not wandering around, locked up, but in Student of Prague, he was still wandering around. In Transformation, the guy was still wandering around, a la Freaky Friday. But I'm assuming, this is what I'm going to assume from Carroll, that Body Snatchers and Stepford Wives are fission monsters, spatial fission monsters. The fact that the originals, the fact that the imposter is the only one around still, doesn't change it from being a spatial fission monster. Because you could perceive of a story, you could have a counter argument of a story where the Body Snatchers kept the people in a spaceship locked up in a meat locker. You can conceive of a story where the Stepford husbands keep the original wives, locked up in a basement somewhere and live creepily with their creepy new wives. Creepy, creepy. Oh, turn it off. I don't want to see it. Ugh. But you know, so for the movies that don't have the people in the meat locker, they're still fission. It doesn't change the fact. That's what I think Carroll would say. So if you're Noel Carroll and you don't say that, you have some explaining to do as to, well, why not? Because obviously, if there was a meat locker, ice box. I keep saying meat locker. If there was an ice box with a guy on an X-ray hook in these three, they'd be, without a doubt, spatial fissions. The fact that the originals are gone in these two, we don't know about this one, of course, doesn't change the fact. Ow. That was my knuckle cracking. Okay, so that's that. I recommend Transformations. I really think you should go and listen to it. It's a malevolent version of Freaky Friday. Capgras syndrome. I'm not sure if I should believe more Wikipedia, being it's more physical, caused by lesions, brain lesions, or trauma to the head, cranial trauma, where they don't believe that their loved ones are the loved ones anymore. They did mention that if it happens for one, it happens. If they believe one person is an imposter, it's more likely they'll believe most people are an imposter. Which I don't know if that proves it more to be more biological or physiological or psychological. Probably physiological. So yeah, if Body Snatchers and Stepford Wives is not an example of spatial fission, why not, Carroll? I can't see a reason why it wouldn't be. If they don't have two or more around, then it's not really spatial fission. In one sense, in the sense of this. But if it's totally spatial fission when the original is alive, and it's, or even, in a ice box someplace in space, why wouldn't it be a fission monster if the original is gone? Or, if there's only one left? That's the question I wanted to pose. And I wanted to talk about Capgras syndrome because I thought it was cool. And I wanted to recommend you guys to at least check out the preview for this because it's pretty funny. If you're a fan of Shaun of the Dead, as I am, I think you'll like it. I don't know if the movie's going to be good, as I haven't seen it. It hasn't come out yet. But that's that. Next time I will go over Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft's versions of what is monster, what is horror, etc. King is going to say that I'm going to hold off on some of King because King's going to say that the monster, to some extent, to a large extent, pushes the plot. The plot is based on the monster, which is fairly accurate in some senses. In some senses, I go by Carroll's. I think Carroll's is probably better talking about the plot. But it's a good thing to go over. There are some good points in Stephen King's talking about the plot and his monsters that are attached to each plot. But he does talk about monstrousness on its own in his Tales of the Hook section. And supernatural horror and literature in the introduction area, H.P. Lovecraft talks about cosmic horror. That's his term. That's what he's shooting for. 15. I remember the page number. Yeah. It's good stuff. Lovecraft is always good stuff. Oh, I did think of a book to buy today. I'm gonna have to go buy a book today. S.T. Joshi, which is one of Lovecraft's, with his Lovecraft's main biographer, Joshi. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. Had a book on weird fiction. What was it called? Experiments in Weird Fiction? I think I'm going to need it for my History of Horror section. I think I'm going to buy that book. Alright, folks. Have a great night. See you next time on Horror Analysis.